Hello and welcome to Backstage Pass. My guest today is the world-renowned lighting designer and teacher, Jennifer Tipton. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for joining us today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you.
I was doing a little research before the interview and discovered that not only do you have a huge body of work, but it's kind of all over the map. I mean, you work in theater, you dance, opera, there's some architectural stuff that I discovered. Two questions. How do you find the time? And do you ever get a vacation?
Well, it is very difficult to manage. I keep at it, and to get the plot done for the next thing is usually, to find the time to do the plot is usually a problem. And I have a small place in Maine where I escape whenever I can, which is very rarely. But, and I feel that I'm extremely lucky as a lighting designer because most are pigeonholed. That is, if you do dance, you do dance. If you do theater, you do theater. And for me, I've been able to do all of them. And what you didn't mention was also the work with artists that I do, like
right.
Robert Gober.
Right.
And you know, I find it thrilling to be able to do that because it brings a kind of freshness of the way I look at light and light in different situations. So I'm very happy to do that.
Terrific. You're working now. You have a show that I believe just opened or just previewed.
Just began previews, and it's Illyria at the Public, written and directed by Richard Nelson. And it's kind of wonderful because it's about the early days of the Delacorte and the Public. So it has all these people that I knew. In fact, the actors who are so young, they didn't know them, but I did. So I get to spend an evening with old friends.
Wow, that's terrific. Just as an aside, I used to babysit Joe Papp's kids when he went to Philadelphia, when they brought a show to Philadelphia. I was the low man on the totem pole, so I got to babysit his kids.
That's great.
You grew up in the South. You were born, I believe, in Columbus, but then you traveled around a lot. And
My parents were both from Georgia, but around the time of the Depression, my father ended up at Ohio State, teaching in the university there, and he sort of, in his lifetime, could not decide whether he wanted to teach at a university or a medical school. So we went back and forth. So from Columbus, when I was about 2.5, we moved to Detroit, Michigan, where my parents saw Gone with the Wind and said, oh, we have to go back to the South. So we moved to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I was in the 1st grade. Then we moved to Birmingham, Alabama, and finally to Knoxville, Tennessee, where I was from the 6th grade through high school. And I left happily to go to Cornell University, and that was the end of my childhood.
So the arts had an effect on your life at a very early age, is what you're saying.
Yes, it's true.
Your father was a zoologist and your mother was a physicist. You went to Cornell and started out in the astrophysics department. But that didn't last very long.
Yeah, I went to Cornell to be the first person on the moon, actually. I was very intent on getting there, but not intent enough to continue that. So after my first year, I changed my major from physics to English and spent all my time in the dance studio and definitely wanted to be a dancer. Summers at Connecticut College School of the Dance and at that time, and winters dancing a lot with the Cornell Dance Club.
Right. But how did that happen, I guess? You come from a very scientific background and clearly you had science on your mind. Where did the dance influence, or where did that kind of start?
I had started when we had moved to Knoxville. I had found a dance teacher in Oak Ridge, as a matter of fact, and so every Saturday I went to Oak Ridge to dance, and that's from the age of 12 on.
Right.
And so dance became a huge part of my life. I didn't dare leave college because I knew my parents wouldn't put up with that.
Right, right.
But I did say, the minute I graduate, I'm going to New York to be a dancer.
So you finished at Cornell, and then you went to New York. And if my research is correct, you hooked up with a dance company called the Merry-Go-Rounders?
Yes, we danced for children every weekend.
Terrific.
And it was great. Wonderful, wonderful experience, and a lot of dancing, a lot of performing. But 3 or 4 years in, I became the rehearsal mistress. The director at that time was Lucas Hoving, who was a dancer with the Jose Limon Company. And he didn't want to go every weekend to watch performances, so I did. And I had to watch them to critique the dancers, but I've always said I looked at the bigger picture, and that was light, and I fell in love with it, and I've been in love with it ever since.
Was it at that point that you met Tom Skelton?
Yes. I don't know how it came up, but we were looking for a stage manager. Oh, I know. And Tom was the person who taught in the summer at the School of the Dance at Connecticut College at that time. It's now at Duke, but then it was at Conn College. Right. And so I went to him to find a stage manager for the company. And he said, well, I'm sure I have somebody to recommend, but you're going to have to clean up my papers to find the name of that person. So I became like his secretary for a while. But of course, learning about light at the same time, and working with him at the 92nd Street Y, where he did many concerts. And so it was good training.
Right. A fun time, I imagine.
A very fun time, yes.
The Upper West Side was a great place to be in those years.
And I learned from him about moving light as a stage manager, because he had me count cues, and of course to count backwards, otherwise you just keep on counting. When you count backwards, at least you come to zero, you know where you are. So he said, you know, count the cues, which I did this first time. Second run through, he said, okay, now phrase the cues. And so from that I learned, you know, that you can make the light go a little faster when you want to, and then slow down at the end, etc. And I could move with the dancers. So when computer boards came along, I thought, oh, you know, this is not going to be so nice. I'm going to have to give up that control. But lo and behold, I loved it when it happens exactly the same way every time.
Early on in my career, I had the pleasure and the honor, actually, of working with people like Twyla Tharp and Mikhail Baryshnikov. And so did you, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about how that went for you.
Well, I mean, particularly Twyla and Misha. It was so, I just thought how wonderful to be able to sit in the studio and watch them dance, just for me, you know, a run through, just to show me the new dance. That, you know, what a lifetime it was to be able to do that. So, and other people too. I mean, working with Jerome Robbins was a life changer, obviously. And, you know, I just feel so honored to have been with them and learned from them, and they made me very happy.
Right. When you say a life changer, can you give us an example, or you know, what does that feel like?
Well, it was just the care with which he did everything. I mean, you know, he drove people crazy, but not me. I was very happy to be still and quiet with him and do things his way. Of course, I learned something interesting, which was that if you work the way he works, which is to tear everything apart. You know, one day I was sitting out doing the lighting, and he was on stage looking at costumes, And the skirts got shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter. And the next day, the dancers came back and their skirts were long. Costume designer knew better, knew that he was going to do that.
Right.
So, but that if you tear apart things, you're only going to get work that is as good as you can imagine. What the challenge is to get designers to do more than they ever dreamed possible. He wasn't very good at that, but he had an imagination that was quite extraordinary, so he got lovely work from us all, as good as he could do.
Somewhere along the way, you picked up a nickname. I'm wondering if you want to talk about that particular nickname. You know the one that I'm referring to? The Buddha?
Just Buddha.
Buddha.
That
Sorry.
was Jerry.
Yeah?
That was Jerry.
Thought it might be.
Because I just stayed so calm and everybody else was screaming around me, but
Right.
not me.
What a great name.
Yes, yes.
In a New York interview one time, you mentioned something about how the effect of lighting has on a production, and the quote that I picked up was, "Any one thing that you do, any change you make, affects everything in the whole production." And I'd love to hear a little bit more about
I learned that. I learned that early on when I was doing a production of The Cherry Orchard with Andre Serban at Lincoln Center at the Beaumont.
Mm-hmm.
And Andre was being European, was kind of different from the directors that I had worked with, and I had not worked with very many at that point. But so, and I had also done mostly dance at that point. So when we got to the second act, which is the act where the sun sets, he said, "Let's go to complete dark." And that to me was a shocking idea, particularly having come from dance, where if you go to black, nothing happens, according to the audience. So, but I went to black, and it was very interesting to me that the voices rang out in the darkness. But I also found that by going to total blackness there, I had to go back and rethink the whole production, all of the acts, because if that was dark, then what was bright? And so it changed the whole range of the way that I saw everything.
The hair on the back of my neck just stood up a little bit. That was awesome. It's been said that you have a sense of light in 3 dimensions, which is a very interesting thing for me, because I work in 3 dimensions. And I don't know that I've ever thought about light in 3 dimensions before. What does that mean?
Well, I think it means basically my worksheets. And what that means is I take the 2 dimensions that I have, meaning the plans of the set and sections, elevations of the set. And with those 2 dimensions, I, find the 3 dimensions that the light will be in when it's on the stage. I had a terrible experience in the Cherry Orchard when I went to focus a boom and it was all behind a fence. That's a very embarrassing moment in one's life. Anyway, so I learned how to, on paper, in 2 dimensions, find the 3 dimensions of light in that way, and so it meant that when I went into focus, I sort of knew what I was doing, and it's a great feeling. You feel much more comfortable, much more secure when you have that in your pocket, as it were.
And I imagine that makes everyone feel a little bit more secure.
Definitely.
Yeah. You have 2 Tony Awards.
Yes.
And they are for?
They are for the Cherry Orchard, which I was amused at the time because the lighting for Annie, I guess, was so terrible. That was the musical of the season that they had to give. In those days, there was only 1 Tony Award for lighting,
Right.
not the 2 that we have today.
Right.
And the other, Maybe it was Jerome Robbins Broadway. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it was.
You've done lighting for many diverse genres or disciplines. When you go from one to the other, do you take things with you from dance, for example, when you light a musical or a play? How does that affect the way you see the actors or work with the actors or work with the set?
Yes, of course I do. I mean, when I first started, the rules were that you lit theater from the front and dance from the side, for instance. And what I very quickly learned is that actors don't often face the front and talk to the audience. I mean, sometimes, and that's a very specific thing, but usually they're talking to each other. And so side light is really the best source angle for light for actors as well as for dancers. Now, of course, if it's the best side light for a dance is side light that's head high, which reveals the body and space, the whole tangle of Balanchine, for instance,
Right.
and so on. With actors, that means they make shadows of each other's faces, so the angle has to be higher for actors. But side light is still best. Also, when I started teaching, it was interesting to me because I'd hear myself say something, and then I'd say, well, if you really believe that, you should change the way you're doing things. And I would change, and it would get better.
Right.
So teaching has always been a way for me to learn and to listen to myself and explore new ideas.
And you've been teaching for some time. You teach at Yale,
I do.
and very well from what I hear. What's that like? And how did you get there? And how do you know how,
Well,
how does it go?
Tom Skelton was teaching there, and he wanted not to teach. He wanted to be free. It is, you know, it is a huge commitment to get there once a week. And so they came to me and asked me, and I said yes, and I was thrilled to be doing it. And it was quite a learning curve there in the beginning. And I can remember one class where I said, okay, now I'm going to tell you about lighting for dance. And everybody got out a pad and a pencil. And of course, I forgot totally what I was going to say.
Right.
So I learned, never say what you're going to do, just do it. But anyway, teaching has been, I love the setup there because we make a commitment to the student. At other places, they take in large numbers of people in the beginning and then drop them out as they go along.
Yeah.
We make a commitment to 2 lighting designers. 2 is the number because we only have practical work for 2. There are 3 directors in the program, and they sort of feed work to our designers. It's you know, a lovely way. They're really like apprentices. And I'm very careful. I don't want to clone myself. That's why I call myself a provocateur. Because I want them to do their work and to find their way. I went thinking, once again, naively, that I can teach all ways. And I very quickly learned that there's only one way I can teach, and that's mine. So the first semester, or maybe even 2 semesters, I'm teaching my way. From then on, I'm just encouraging and supporting their ways.
Right.
And it's better that way. And having only 6 in the program at one time, it really is a wonderful commitment that I have to make to them, and they become lifelong friends.
Yeah. Yeah, that was going to be my next question. How do you follow or stay in touch with your students after they leave Yale?
I recently had an 80th birthday, and in the beginning of teaching, when my birthday came around, I would get together with former students, and it would be a lovely dinner. Began to get too big, and I felt very awkward about it, because those people who sat down there at the end of the table, I never got to talk to, didn't see very much, etc. So I stopped doing that. But here for the 80th, I had everybody invited, all of them, to come back, as well as other people. But it was great to see them all.
Yeah,
And,
I'll bet. In addition to all your lighting work, you have done other things, and one of them is you directed a show in Minneapolis, I believe.
Yes.
And that was?
At the Guthrie. It was the Tempest.
How was that?
It was out-of-body experience, totally. First of all, I adore Shakespeare. So that, to do the Tempest, to get to know the Tempest so intimately in that way was thrilling. To sit in a room, and I did cast Ariel as a woman, or I cast a woman as Ariel, because I did want at least 2 other women in the room. And but to sit and watch people move around in the beginning was just, it was like I was sitting up there looking down. I had nothing to do with it. One of the experiences was the best of my life, and that is the funny scenes with Stefano and Caliban and what's his name? Forget the third. And we laughed and we laughed and we laughed, and somehow I could hear the laughter from the centuries just echoing over the scene. It was incredible. And I do say, and I have said about it when people ask, that when you're directing, you're grappling with the same ideas that you're grappling with in lighting. So it is kind of the same, but lights don't talk back to you the way actors do.
True. Very true. You've done other work, other lighting work that is outside of theater and dance, some architectural work, and you've worked with a number of artists. How does that happen, and what's it feel like? How does that go?
Well, people in architecture are always wanting to explore working with lighting designers for theater. I find it kind of awkward. I'm used to a 2 or 3 week work period. In architecture, it's sometimes a 2 or 3 year period. And it's very difficult, I find, for me to sustain the interest and the involvement over that long period of time.
Sure. You've worked with artists. We were talking earlier this morning.
Yes, the primary one is Robert Gober, who I've done quite a few projects with.
Right.
As a matter of fact, there's the opening of the Glen Cove Museum in Maryland now, and he has a whole room that we've done before.
Okay.
And so it's been terrific, actually, to go down and see the how it works,
right,
and see the painting as it comes, because the walls are being painted.
Right.
And of course there's now LED light, which is very different from the original incandescent light,
right,
that lit it.
Which was one of my questions. I mean, you're a lighting designer. I have to ask you your opinion of LED lights. I mean, there's a little switch in the back of my head that makes me do that.
Yes, well, I sat in the final dress rehearsal of The Exterminating Angel at the Metropolitan Opera yesterday, thinking that those poor singers, they'll never again be in beautiful incandescent light. Mm. And, one wonders why about that choice. Are they used just because they're there? Is it a particular choice? I don't know. I mean, I'm a dinosaur, I guess. But always when lighting sources change, people say, oh, I wish, bring back the candlelight, bring back the gaslight,
Right.
etc. LEDs, well, they're not full spectrum.
Right.
And therefore, they do not light human beings' skin in the way that incandescent light does.
Right.
So I'm unhappy.
Duly noted. What's it feel like when somebody brings a project to you, whether it's a dance or a design for a theater show, and you read the script or you look at the dance piece, and you just know that it's just an awesome, awesome piece of work, and that you're going to have a lot of fun working with it? What does that feel like to you?
I don't know that I can answer that exactly, but let me tell you about the last Broadway play that I did, which was The Doll's House Part 2.
Hmm.
And the first time I read it, it was, I kept thinking to myself, how is this going to end? Am I really going to be able to do this? Am I going to be is this going to be fair to women? And, and so reading and discovering as I went along the wonderful ways that Lucas had told the story and involved all sides in this amazing way until you get to the end, and yes, I could do it, and it is a fantastic play, and it only proved to be better than fantastic. And it was one of the first things, only things in my life where I really was sorry when the time came that I couldn't be there every night. They wouldn't give me a ticket.
Shame on them.
I could have gone to see it for the rest of my life.
So let's take that conversation and go a little in the same vein, but in another direction. Women working in the theater. It's always been a challenge. I can imagine that it was a challenge for you.
Not really. It was not so much a challenge. I think it's not so much a challenge in America. Of the 3 original lighting designers, 2 of them were women. The 3 original were Abe Fader, Jean Rosenthal, and Peggy Clark. 2 of them were women. And I think all those old fuddy-duddy guys who work on a crew got used to being told what to do by women and therefore accepted it. And the only time that I have known that I was not chosen because I was a woman was for a German company, and they said that they didn't, they were sure that the Germans didn't want a woman.
What advice do you have for people who are entering the design world these days? Kids coming out of college and those who want to be lighting designers, entry level. Do you have words of wisdom for them?
It's very sort of difficult because I never went to college to learn about lighting.
Mm-hmm.
I never did a graduate program. And here I am teaching one. And so it's a little bit difficult for me to advise young people. I feel strongly that they need some kind of formal way to approach light. That if they sort of just thrash about, and of course they wouldn't say they're thrashing about, but if they do that, to find the way to light something, as they get older, that's just not going to hold up.
Right.
I also recommend to young designers who want to do graduate school work that they look at the college, they look at the people who are graduating from the program to know whether they'd like to be doing what they're doing, to be working with people like that, to be doing the kind of theater that they're doing, because the people that you meet in college are the people you're going to be working with.
So what do you think the future looks like? What's it look like 5 or 10 years down the road? What does the industry look like?
Well, I have some thoughts about that, but 5 or 10 years, I don't know. I can't predict that. But I do know it certainly happened in Europe that big theaters, or theaters, even some small theaters, have only intelligent lights, moving lights, and no longer any conventionals. I had an interesting experience in Paris, actually, with Midsummer Night's Dream, Balanchine's Midsummer Night's Dream. And the set for it in Paris, everything, it covered the First Electric, it just filled the whole space. And so it was just absolutely necessary to have booms, and they had 10, and it needed 14. So they had to do 4 more for me, which they finally did. And then I discovered, you see, that people have forgotten how to focus. Because now they have all of these intelligent lights that they program for the focus, but they don't know what to do with the booms. Very interesting. Anyway, that I feel is our future, that it's all going to be intelligent light, that we will be able to control it from the computer, including color. Color is going to be a disaster because I did a Giselle for the Royal Ballet in London. 15 years later, they brought it back. What is color going to be like 15 years from the first luster to the 25th luster? It's going to be a big challenge for repertory companies and such. And I feel strongly as a designer, there is only one good place for a light to do whatever. And if you need it in 2 colors, that's already a compromise. You either have to put one of the colors in the good place and the second one quite far, or split the place and compromise both colors. Right. So for me, a moving light is not necessarily the answer. Right. I want a light that's only doing that in that place, and the light doing the other thing in the next place, or something like that. And I'm just finding I'm now going to be working at the Bolshoi in the next few weeks, and they've chosen their moving lights of different varieties. So you have a Fresnel, you have a beam light, you have a par, you have and on and on. Occasionally there's a profile. So it's very difficult to make systems that work together with such a variety of lights. It's going to be a real challenge in the future. But then I grew up lighting the way I light. As other people grow up in this system, I'm sure the artists in it will find the way to make the art.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the process, your process for coming up with a lighting design. Is that something you'd be willing to share?
Oh, sure. As a matter of fact, I teach it, so you can come and find out about it. It does take me a while to go through it from the beginning to the end. But basically I say that one lights from the front, the side, and the back. And occasionally there's a set, more than occasionally, there's a set that doesn't allow at least one of those angles to be used. And therefore you have to do it with 2 of them, but desperately hang on to the 2. And if you have a box set, then do make it so that you light from the front and the side, even though it's only the front side. It's still, make a difference between. angles. And color is always difficult to talk about, of course, because it's very personal, first of all. But amber is not allowed at Yale, at least in the beginning, unless there's a really good case for it. Reason being that, first of all, people come to Yale using a lot of amber. It seems to be the color of choice. Why it's not allowed at Yale is because all skin is all colors. And there's a lot of blue in skin. And amber is only red and green of the primaries. It's only red and green. So all the blue disappears when you're lighting faces with amber, whatever the color of the face. And so if you want amber, you can use white light at a low reading, incandescent light, not LED light, but LED, who knows what color is in LED at this point. And anyway, if you use white light, then it still has the blue in it. And it can be as amber as you wish, but the blue still comes through. Amber also is hard on costume color. But anyway, that is an aside. I also don't like downlights because I like just the top of the head, the nose, the shoulders.
Right.
You know, so for me, it should either be backlight or front light. It can be down-ish, but back or front.
Right.
Those are just whims, shall I say, of mine. But I don't think there's nothing else at the moment that I can think of. Obviously, you work in reading. You learn to read scripts in a way that allows for other ideas than your own. Because if you design all the light, you read the script, you design all the light, then you go to the meeting with the director and the set designer, but those are not your ideas they're talking about. That's something else. So rather than be jolted by these other ideas, you learn to read a script and accommodate the places where they're going to be, or the way that there's going to be other ideas about it. I guess that's all I can say in a short period of time.
Terrific. Who knew about the blue? You were involved with the legendary lighting salesman Sonny Sonnenfeld up until the time of his passing about a year and a half ago. What was that like for you?
It was unimaginable. I can't tell you what a gift it was to have him in my life. I adored him, and I think he adored me, and certainly every time, every thought that I had or discomfort that I had with a man in my life, I found that trait in him endearing. He could do no wrong in my eyes. And, you know, I found out just how remarkable a man that he was. So many times I sat at the dining room table across from him and another person who he was telling about a project that he had for them and that they had to go out and, you know, build a big building over Grand Central and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
So, not at Grand Central, that's already done. Macy's.
Macy's, right.
Anyway, he was a wonderful man,
right.
And I loved him dearly.
For those of you, especially those of you in the younger generations who may not be familiar with Sonny Sonnenfeld, I urge you to Google him, and you'll see the life of a very extraordinary person. Jennifer, this has been a real treat for me. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to celebrate with a little bit of this.
Very good. Enjoy your celebration.
Would you like some?
No, thank you.
No?
I have a rehearsal of Illyria to go to in
right.
just
Okay.
a few hours. So
All right.
I will Abstain.
I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thank you.